Most people are afraid of failure. Chima was afraid of something else. He was afraid of making the wrong life decision, afraid of running from his purpose, afraid of forgetting who he was, afraid of living without clarity. So he disappeared. Not physically, emotionally. Chima moved to Oru village to disappear. He was tired of being known, tired of expectations, tired of being someone people recognized before he even spoke. So he chose a place where no one knew his name, or so he thought. On his third morning, there was a knock on his door. 3 calm knocks, not urgent, not hesitant, certain. He opened the door. A man stood there, relaxed, composed, looking directly at him. The man smiled. "You left later than expected." Chima froze, because he had never seen this man before, and yet the man spoke as if he had been waiting. Chima stared carefully. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" The man smiled again, not awkwardly, not nervously, comfortably. "My name is DK. I live next door." Chima nodded slowly, still unsure, still cautious. Then DK said something that made Chima uncomfortable. "You always choose quiet places when you need clarity." Chima's chest tightened. He had never told anyone that, not even his closest friends. "How do you know that?" DK met his eyes calmly. "I've known you longer than you think." And suddenly, this wasn't just a conversation, it was a mystery. Over the next few days, DK appeared often. Not intrusively, not forcefully, just present. He never asked too many questions, but somehow he always said exactly what Chima needed to hear. One evening, Chima sat outside alone, thinking. DK walked past, stopped, and said quietly, "You're not here to escape. You're here to decide." Decide what? Before Chima could ask, DK kept walking, as if he had already said enough. And for the first time, Chima wondered if this stranger understood him better than anyone ever had. Days later, DK said something unexpected. "You almost left this village tomorrow." Chima frowned. How would you know that? He hadn't told anyone, not even himself. It was just a thought, a possibility. DK looked at him gently. "Because you did before." Chima stopped breathing. Before? There was no before. He had never been here. And yet, DK wasn't guessing. He was remembering. The next morning, DK brought him a notebook. Old, worn, familiar. Chima opened it. His name was inside, his handwriting. Every page filled with thoughts, plans, reflections. His plans. But he didn't remember writing any of it. Then he turned another page and froze, because the words described this exact moment, meeting DK, sitting under the tree, trying to leave. It was all there, written before it happened. "How is this possible?" he asked. DK answered calmly, "Because you've been here before." "You left once," DK said, "and you regretted it. You spent years searching for clarity, and eventually you returned. You asked me to remind you if you ever forgot again." Chima felt something shift inside him. DK hadn't found him. He had been waiting for him to become himself again. "Why don't I remember?" Chima asked. DK answered, "Because you weren't ready to. Sometimes we must become someone new before we can understand who we were." The next morning, DK was gone. No sign, no trace, as if he had never existed. But Chima understood now. DK hadn't come to lead him, he had come to remind him. Chima sat under the tree, opened the notebook, and began to write. Not to remember, not to predict, but to guide. Because one day he might forget again. And when he did, he would be there, waiting, calm, certain, ready to remind himself who he had always been. DK was not just a stranger. He was never just a stranger. DK was Chima's future self. Not a different man, not a coincidence, but the version of Chima who had already lived through the confusion, the running, and the regret. He had returned, not to change the past, but to guide it, because he knew something his past self did not yet understand. He knew Chima would forget. He knew Chima would doubt himself. He knew Chima would try to run again, and he couldn't allow that to happen. So he came back, calm, certain, patient, not to force him, but to remind him of who he really is. This is self-discovery. Chima sat under the udala tree long after the sun had risen. The notebook rested on his lap, open, patient, waiting. The village was quiet, too quiet, not empty, but complete, as if nothing was missing, because nothing was. DK was gone. No footprints, no open door, no farewell, just absence. And yet, Chima did not feel abandoned. He felt continued. He ran his fingers across the notebook's pages, across words written in his own hand, words he did not remember writing, but words that understood him completely. Not who he was pretending to be, but who he truly was. And for the first time since arriving in Oru village, Chima stopped questioning. He simply listened. Not to the village, not to the silence, but to himself. At first it was subtle, not a memory, not an image, a feeling, familiar, certain. He remembered the calm in DK's voice, the patience, the certainty. DK had never tried to control him, never forced him, never stopped him. He had only reminded him. And suddenly, Chima realized something that made his chest tighten. DK had never told him anything new. He had only told him things he already knew, things he had forgotten, things he had once believed, things he had once promised himself. Chima looked down at the notebook again, and slowly a deeper question surfaced. Not who was DK, but who had written this notebook? He already knew the answer. He just hadn't accepted it yet. Days passed. Chima remained in the village, not hiding, not escaping, remaining, living simply, thinking clearly. For the first time in years, he was not running from himself. He was sitting beside himself, learning himself again. And then, one evening, as the sun lowered itself behind the trees, Chima noticed something, not outside, inside. A calm he had never felt before. Not happiness, not excitement. Clarity. The same clarity DK had carried. The same stillness, the same certainty. And in that moment, Chima understood. DK had never been ahead of him. DK had always been within him. The realization did not arrive loudly. It arrived quietly, like truth always does. DK was not just a stranger. DK was not just a guide. DK was not just someone who had been waiting. DK was him. DK was Chima. Not the Chima who was afraid, not the Chima who ran, not the Chima who doubted himself, but the Chima who had stayed, the Chima who had learned, the Chima who had grown. DK was the man Chima would become. The notebook proved it. Every page, every word, every moment, Chima had already lived this life once. He had already come to Oru village. He had already faced himself. He had already left, and he had already regretted it. He had spent years searching for clarity, searching for direction, searching for something he had abandoned, until one day he returned to the village, returned to the tree, returned to himself. And when he returned, he made a decision. He would not allow himself to forget again. So he became the reminder. He became DK. DK had never appeared by accident. He had appeared by design. Chima's design, not to change the past, but to protect the future. Not to control himself, but to guide himself. Not to save himself, but to remind himself. Because he knew something his past self did not. He knew how easy it was to run, how easy it was to doubt, how easy it was to forget, and how painful it was to live without purpose. So he returned, not as a stranger, but as proof that clarity existed, proof that peace was possible, proof that he would survive himself. If this story spoke to you, it's because part of you understood it. Some strangers don't come to change your life. They come to remind you who you already are. Subscribe for more stories that stay with you long after they end.